Welcome! This video shows ways to analyze and manage asset use in your crop plan. This is step 3 of the planning process. Step 3 has 3 paths. Number 1, analyzing and increasing income. Number 2, analyzing and managing risk. And number 3, analyzing and managing asset use. In this video, we're heading down the path towards analyzing and managing asset use. Asset management measures and other outcomes are driven by management decisions. Asset use, profitability, and risk are all related. Every action has a reaction, or two. Changes in asset use will likely cause changes in estimated income and the risk profile. Modeling conservation management practices poses challenges and opportunities. It may be best to analyze asset use after looking at ways to increase income, but before analyzing risk. This is only a suggestion. There's no right or wrong approach. Analyzing asset use can include soil, water, fertilizer use, chemicals, labor, equipment, crop storage, nearly any asset. The key is to be able to reasonably estimate costs and benefits. Define the practice and estimate impacts on crop yields, prices, and production costs. Let's look at using a cover crop as an example. Putting in the crop takes working capital. Nutrient release from a cover crop improves fertility and yields, which may decrease fertilizer costs or provide other benefits. Applying a lesser amount of nitrogen on corn can be analyzed by creating 2 corn crops, a conventional crop and one using less nitrogen that has lower per acre production costs and lower yield than the conventional corn. Long-term benefits, such as soil tilth, bioorganisms, infiltration, erosion control, biodiversity, etc., are difficult to quantify but still real. Net, some decisions regarding conservation practices can be hard to put a dollar value on. It can be difficult to see past the crop planning horizon, but conservation practices can still factor into planning. Planting Profits uses 2 direct measures for conservation practices: percentage of acreage in conservation crops and percentage of estimated income from conservation crops. An analysis approach is to calibrate changes in these measures against changes in estimated income, resource use, or any other expected trade-off. There are 5 management levers that can be pulled to analyze asset use that are under your control. These levers can be pulled individually or in combination to change a strategy's estimated income. Depending on your operation, some paths may be more feasible or desirable than others. Let's look at each. As an example of reducing resource use, let's look at having to manage the impact next season from a 30% reduction in water from the irrigation district. The farm's annual water allocation is 7,000 acre-feet. Nearly all available water is used in the planned baseline strategy. Now let's decrease water by 30% to model the lesser allocation. Use the multiple resource sensitivity analysis tool to decrease water allocation. Analyze the strategy. As water allocation decreases, estimated income decreases, but not proportionally. As acres shift from cotton to wheat and soybeans, water use decreases faster. Save this strategy to compare the crop mix and some of the other output measures to the baseline strategy. The percent of acreage in conservation practices increased because wheat was marked as a conservation crop. In this example, we'll analyze changing crop-field combinations to evaluate more agronomic and ecologically beneficial cropping patterns. Normally, this analysis is done using a field model, but it can also be analyzed using an acres model and crop acreage limits. For this grower, a basic rotation pattern is to never plant the same crop in the same field 2 years in a row. We'll keep this pattern intact and further restrict possible crop field choices to weed out the ones that will deplete the soil versus other crop choices that are restorative in terms of soil structure, fertility, microorganisms, etc. We're going to modify the crop field choices so there are no fields that will allow corn following cotton or cotton following corn. The assumption being that soil health is restored beyond what it would have been compared to the current baseline crop mix. Look for fields that had cotton or corn planted in them last year. Remove cotton and corn as crop field choices for these fields. This prevents any field that was planted to cotton last year from being planted to corn next year, and any field that was planted to corn last year from being planted to cotton next year. Planting Profits will find the most profitable mix within this more conservation-minded set of crop field combinations. Note that the other two crops in the mix, wheat and soybeans, are marked as conservation practice crops. Analyze the strategy. Acres shifted from cotton and corn to wheat and soybeans. As expected, estimated income decreased. The percentage of acreage in conservation practices increased. In addition to changing crop field choices, as shown in this example, allocating acreage to conservation practices may also require changing crop acreage limits or defining new conservation-minded crops, such as low-input corn, covered later. Change crop acreage limits to increase the percentage of acreage in crops with conservation benefits. This is similar to the previous example and can be done if you are planning using an acres model. If you do not have a conservation crop, create one. This includes designating it as conservation crop on the crop information page. If you are planning by fields, minimum crop limits and crop field choices will drive crop acreage assignments. Increase the minimum acreage limit of one or more crops designated as a conservation practice crop to assign more acreage to conservation crops. Alternatively, decrease the maximum acreage limit of one or more crops not designated as conservation practice crops. Analyze the strategy. Here is the shift in acreage. This is the difference in estimated income. The percentage of estimated income from conservation practices increased, and the percentage of acreage in conservation practices increased. Evaluate changing over to a practice that further protects soil, water, wildlife, etc. To analyze this, create a new crop that represents the practice. It could be a different or new agronomic practice, a different tillage practice, a different irrigation practice, or buffer practice. Define the conservation practice by creating a new crop using the Crop Master. We're going to create a minimum tillage corn crop. We'll add this to our possible mix, then use this to compare to our current strategy. Enter expected yields, prices, and production costs for the conservation practice crop. Look at the estimated income. Click through the rest of the pages and add required information. We'll have to add a minimum acreage limit to force at least the same acreage of the conservation practice crop into the mix. Analyze the strategy. Acres shifted to the conservation practice crop. Estimated income decreased. The percentage of estimated income from conservation practices increased, and the percentage of acreage in conservation practices increased. Evaluate adding a conservation crop which could be a green fertilizer crop or a cover crop in combination with a conventional crop. There is likely a higher production cost. Similar to the previous example, go to the Crop Master to create a new crop. Enter expected yield, price, and production costs. Click through the rest of the pages and add required information. If necessary, add a minimum acreage limit to force acreage of conservation crop into the mix. Analyze the strategy. Acres shifted to the conservation crop. Estimated income decreased. The percentage of estimated income from conservation practices increased, and the percentage of acreage in conservation practices increased. Here is a checklist to use to mark which of the ways that analyzing asset use look most fruitful. You can download the checklist from the Learning Center. There are 2 other training videos that cover Step 3, Analyzing Increasing Income and Analyzing and Managing Risk. Thank you for your time. For more information, please go to www.plantingprofits.com.